You ever feel like you're grinding every single day, pushing yourself to the limit, and it's still not enough? Like no matter how hard you train, how much you sacrifice, there's this invisible ceiling you can't break through? That's not weakness. That's the exact trap that destroyed Rock Lee, and bro, it was never about being strong enough. See, we've been sold this lie that effort equals results, that if you just work harder than everyone else, you'll make it. Rock Lee believed that. He became the hardest worker in the Hidden Leaf, proved everyone wrong, even opened the 8 gates. But here's the thing nobody talks about. His greatest strength was also the wound that kept bleeding. The same drive that made him legendary is what isolated him, broke him down, and left him fighting a battle he could never actually win. And if you're watching this right now, there's a chance you're living the same pattern, pouring everything into proving yourself while slowly losing pieces of who you actually are. This isn't about anime anymore. This is about the psychology of pain we refuse to name. If you're still here, it's because something in this hit you. Most people feel that and scroll away. They go right back into the cycle that's destroying them. Don't do that to yourself again. Subscribe. Not for me. For the you that finally recognized the pattern, and is tired of pretending it doesn't hurt. Let's talk about what actually happened to Rock Lee and why it matters way more than you think. See, Rock Lee wasn't just some underdog character that worked hard and got results. Nah, his entire existence was built on a psychological defense mechanism that most people live their whole lives inside of without ever noticing. It's called compensatory striving, and it's one of the most dangerous patterns a human being can fall into, especially if you grew up feeling like you weren't enough. Here's how it works. When you're young and you realize you don't have something everyone else has, talent, natural ability, the right genetics, the right family, whatever, you make a decision. Usually unconsciously. You decide that you're gonna outwork everyone. You're gonna prove that effort beats talent. You tell yourself that discipline is gonna be your superpower, that consistency will make up for everything you lack. And in the short term, it works. People start noticing you. They respect the grind. You become known as the one who never quits. Rock Lee did exactly this. He couldn't use ninjutsu or genjutsu, so he became a taijutsu specialist. He trained harder than Neji, harder than Sasuke, harder than anyone. And for a while it looked like he was winning. But here's the trap nobody talks about. Compensatory striving doesn't heal the original wound. It just covers it. You're not actually building self-worth, you're building a performance. And the scariest part? The better you get at performing, the more you lose touch with who you are underneath it all. Rock Lee's identity became entirely dependent on being the hardest worker. His value as a person was tied to his ability to push past limits. So what happens when you hit a limit you can't push past? What happens when effort stops being enough? That's when the system collapses. And that's exactly what happened to Rock Lee during the Chunin exams. Let's break down the Gaara fight because that wasn't just a battle, it was a psychological event. Rock Lee went into that fight carrying the weight of every person who ever doubted him. He was fighting to prove that hard work beats genius. He was fighting to validate his entire existence. And at first it worked. He took off his weights, he moved faster than anyone expected, he even managed to hurt Gaara. For a moment, it looked like the underdog was gonna win. But then Gaara's sand caught him. And Rock Lee made the decision that defines his entire character. He opened the Hidden Lotus, a move that destroys your body because winning that fight was more important than his own safety. That's not courage. That's self-destruction disguised as determination. And even after that didn't work, even after his body was breaking down, he opened more gates. He pushed further. He fought until he literally couldn't stand anymore. And here's the most tragic part. Even after he was unconscious, his body kept trying to fight. His unconscious mind was so locked into the pattern of never give up, that it wouldn't let him rest even when rest was the only option. That image of Rock Lee standing unconscious, his body refusing to fall, is one of the most haunting moments in anime. Not because it's inspiring, but because it shows what happens when your identity becomes a prison. Now let's talk about what happened after. Rock Lee's body was destroyed. The doctors told him he'd never fight again. His entire sense of purpose, everything he built his life around, was gone. And this is where the psychology gets really dark. When your entire identity is built on compensatory striving, and that thing gets taken away, you don't just lose a skill, you lose yourself. Rock Lee didn't know who he was outside of being the hardest worker. He didn't have hobbies, he didn't have relationships outside of his training, he didn't have a sense of self that existed independently of his performance. So when he couldn't perform anymore, he fell into what psychologists call an identity crisis. A state where you genuinely don't know who you are or what your life means. And here's what makes this even more real. Rock Lee's story is happening to people every single day in real life. Think about the kid who builds their whole identity around being the smart one, and then gets to college and realizes everyone's smart. Think about the athlete who defines themselves by their sport and then gets injured. Think about the person who grinds at their job for years, sacrifices their health and relationships, and then gets laid off. What happens to them? They don't just lose a job, they lose their sense of reality. Because they built their entire self-concept on something external, something that could be taken away. This is the hidden cost of compensatory striving. You think you're building strength, but you're actually building fragility. You think you're proving your worth, but you're actually reinforcing the belief that you're only valuable when you're performing. And the worst part? The people around you encourage it. They call you dedicated. They say you're inspirational. They celebrate your grind. But nobody's checking in on whether you're okay underneath it all. Nobody's asking if you even like the person you're becoming. And that's exactly what happened with Rock Lee. Everyone praised his work ethic, but nobody helped him build an identity outside of it. Now Guy Sensei tried to help him. He told Rock Lee that he was proud of him, that he didn't need to prove anything anymore. But here's the thing, when someone's entire identity is built on proving themselves, you can't just tell them to stop. It's not a logical decision, it's a psychological need. Rock Lee needed to prove himself because that's how he survived feeling worthless as a kid. That's how he coped with being told he'd never be a real ninja. And even though Guy's words were kind, they couldn't undo years of internalized shame and compensatory behavior. So what happened next? Rock Lee had a surgery that could either fix him or paralyze him forever. And he took it. Because the possibility of fighting again was worth the risk of losing everything. That decision tells you everything you need to know about how deep the pattern goes. He couldn't imagine a life where he wasn't fighting, where he wasn't proving himself. His entire sense of meaning was tied to that identity. And even though the surgery worked, even though he came back and kept fighting, the psychological wound never healed. He just went back to the same pattern. Train harder, push further, prove yourself again. And that's the thing about compensatory striving, it doesn't have an end point. There's no moment where you finally feel like you've done enough. Because the wound you're trying to heal isn't about effort. It's about worth. And you can't earn worth through performance. You either believe you have it or you spend your whole life trying to prove it. Rock Lee spent his whole life trying to prove it. And in the process he lost the chance to ever just be, to exist without needing to justify his existence through pain. Here's where it gets even darker, and where Rock Lee's story stops being about anime and starts being a mirror you can't look away from. Because the real tragedy isn't that he got hurt, it's that he never understood what was actually driving him. And that's the scariest part about compensatory striving. You think you're in control. You think you're making choices. You think you're the one deciding to work harder, to push further, to sacrifice more. But you're not. You're running from something. And the faster you run, the less you realize you're still in the same place. Let's get real about what was happening in Rock Lee's mind during all of this. When he was training alone at night, when everyone else was sleeping, when he was doing thousands of kicks until his legs were bleeding, what do you think he was thinking about? He wasn't thinking about becoming stronger. He was thinking about the faces of people who said he'd never make it. He was replaying every moment he felt small, every time someone laughed at him, every instance where he wasn't picked first. That's what compensatory striving actually is. It's not about the future you're building, it's about the past you're trying to rewrite. And here's the brutal truth, you can't rewrite the past. No matter how strong you get, that kid who felt worthless is still inside you, still waiting for someone to say you're enough. And when no one does, you just keep working harder, thinking maybe the next achievement will finally make you feel whole. This is why Rock Lee couldn't stop, even when his body was begging him to. It's why he opened the gates knowing it could kill him. It's why he took that surgery with a 50% chance of paralysis. Because stopping would mean facing the thing he'd been running from his whole life. The fear that maybe, without the grind, without the pain, without the constant proof of effort, he was nothing. And bro, that's not exclusive to anime characters. That's the lived experience of millions of people right now. The entrepreneur who can't take a day off because their business is the only thing that makes them feel valuable. The student who has a breakdown over one bad grade because their entire identity is wrapped up in being smart. The parent who overworks themselves trying to give their kids everything, because deep down they're terrified of being seen as a failure. What makes this so insidious is that society celebrates this behavior. We make movies about people who work themselves to death. We give awards to the ones who sacrifice everything. We call it dedication, passion, commitment. But we never call it what it actually is, a trauma response. Rock Lee wasn't dedicated, he was dysregulated. His nervous system was stuck in a constant state of hypervigilance, always scanning for the next threat to his worth, always needing to prove he belonged. And every time he trained until he collapsed, every time he pushed past his limits, he was reinforcing the neural pathway that said, your worth is conditional on your performance. That's not strength, that's a prison made of dopamine hits and validation-seeking behavior. And here's where the psychology gets really gnarly. The more you invest in compensatory striving, the more terrifying it becomes to stop. Because now it's not just about healing the original wound, it's about justifying all the pain you already went through. Rock Lee couldn't admit that maybe the grind wasn't worth it because that would mean all those nights of training, all those injuries, all that suffering, it was for nothing. This is what psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy, and it keeps people trapped in destructive patterns for decades. I've already sacrificed so much, I can't stop now. I've already proven myself this far, I just need to go a little further. But there is no further. There's just more of the same pain, dressed up as progress. Let's talk about what happened during the Sasuke retrieval arc, because that's where you really see the full scope of Rock Lee's psychological trap. He wasn't fully healed yet. The doctors told him not to fight. His body wasn't ready. But when the mission came up, he went anyway. What? Because sitting out would mean admitting he wasn't strong enough. It would mean facing the possibility that all his effort, all his recovery, still wasn't enough to keep up with the naturally talented people like Sasuke and Neji. So he fought through the pain. He pushed his body past what it could handle. And he did it with a smile on his face because that's what the performance required. That's what people expected from Rock Lee, the guy who never gives up. But behind that smile was a person who was terrified of being irrelevant, of being forgotten, of proving that everyone who doubted him was right all along. And the thing is, nobody around him knew how to help. Guy Sensei loved him, truly cared about him, but even Guy was caught in the same pattern. Guy's entire teaching philosophy was built on the same compensatory striving, hard work beats talent. He passed that mindset down to Rock Lee like an inheritance, not realizing it was also passing down the wound. This is how generational trauma works. We think we're teaching people resilience, but we're actually teaching them to override their own needs, to ignore their pain, to sacrifice themselves on the altar of achievement. And the most tragic part? We do it with love. We do it thinking we're helping. Guy thought he was saving Rock Lee from a life of mediocrity. But what he actually did was teach him that his worth was conditional, that love had to be earned through suffering. Now let's get into what this looks like in real life, because if you're watching this and something in your stomach is twisting, there's a reason. Maybe you're the person who can't say no to extra shifts at work because you're terrified of being seen as lazy. Maybe you're the one who studies until 3 in the morning, not because you love learning but because anything less than perfect feels like failure. Maybe you're the one who keeps relationships at arm's length because being vulnerable feels like weakness, and weakness is the one thing you swore you'd never be again. That's Rock Lee's pattern. That's the compensatory striving showing up in your life. And here's what nobody tells you: it doesn't get better on its own. It doesn't fade with time. It actually gets worse, because the longer you live in that pattern, the more your brain wires itself to believe that's just who you are. The neuroscience behind this is wild. When you repeatedly engage in compensatory behavior, overworking, overtraining, overperforming, your brain starts producing cortisol and adrenaline as a baseline. Your body gets addicted to the stress response. You start to feel uncomfortable when things are calm, when there's nothing to fight, when you're not in pain. This is why people who grind constantly often feel anxious or restless on vacation. This is why Rock Lee couldn't sit still, couldn't relax, couldn't just exist without needing to prove something. His brain had been conditioned to associate rest with danger, calm with worthlessness. So even when he had permission to stop, even when people told him it was okay to just be, his nervous system screamed at him to keep moving, keep fighting, keep proving. And the cruelest part of all? The world rewards this behavior right up until it breaks you. Rock Lee was celebrated for his work ethic, praised for his determination, held up as an example, until his body gave out. And then what? The same people who cheered him on weren't there for the recovery. They weren't there during the identity crisis. They moved on to the next inspiring story, the next person grinding themselves into dust. Because society doesn't actually care about your well-being, it cares about your productivity. And the moment you stop being productive, you become invisible. Rock Lee learned that the hard way. And so do millions of people every single day when they burn out, break down, and realize that all the people who said keep going are nowhere to be found when it's time to pick up the pieces. So here's the question that Rock Lee never got to ask himself, and the question you need to ask yourself right now: what are you actually running from? What wound are you trying to heal by working yourself to death? What version of yourself are you trying to prove wrong? Because until you answer that, until you actually face the thing underneath all the effort, you're just gonna keep running. You're gonna keep grinding. You're gonna keep sacrificing pieces of yourself, thinking that the next achievement, the next milestone, the next moment of recognition will finally make you feel whole. But it won't. It never does. Because the hole you're trying to fill isn't shaped like success. It's shaped like unconditional self-acceptance. And you can't earn that. You can only choose it. Rock Lee never got that choice because nobody around him knew how to offer it. But you do. You're reading this right now, which means some part of you already knows the grind isn't working anymore. Some part of you is tired. Some part of you wants permission to stop proving yourself and just exist. And here's the wildest part. You don't need permission. You never did. The only person who can release you from this pattern is you. But first, you gotta see it for what it is. You gotta stop calling it dedication and start calling it what it actually is. Fear dressed up as ambition, pain disguised as purpose. A wound that never healed trying to save itself through exhaustion. You already know which version of Rock Lee lives inside you. Drop one word below, the thing that keeps you fighting even when you're done. Don't overthink it. Just name it. Because the ones who scroll past this, they're still pretending they're fine. Stay till the end, because what's coming next isn't about strength anymore. It's about what happens when strength becomes a cage. Here's the part that's gonna mess with your head. Rock Lee was never supposed to win. Not because he wasn't strong enough, not because he didn't work hard enough, but because the entire system he built his life around was designed to fail. And the crazy thing? He knew it. Deep down, somewhere beneath all the training and the speeches about never giving up, Rock Lee knew that hard work beating talent was a beautiful lie. He knew it every time he fought Neji and lost. He knew it every time he watched Sasuke learn in days what took him months. He knew it when Gaara's sand crushed him without even trying. But he kept going anyway. Not because he believed he could win, but because stopping would mean admitting the truth. And the truth was too painful to face. This is what I'm talking about when I say the prophecy fulfilled itself in silence. Rock Lee's greatest fear wasn't failure, it was irrelevance. It was the terror that without the grind, without the constant proof of effort, he would disappear. That people would forget him. That he'd become just another background character in someone else's story. So he made himself unforgettable through suffering. He turned his pain into his brand. And everyone loved him for it. But here's the dark truth. They didn't love him. They loved the idea of him. They loved the underdog narrative. They loved feeling inspired by someone else's struggle. But nobody actually wanted to be Rock Lee. Nobody wanted to live his life. Because living his life meant waking up every day knowing you're not enough, and choosing to destroy yourself trying to prove otherwise. Let's talk about what happened after the time skip, because this is where the silence gets deafening. Rock Lee came back stronger, faster, more skilled than ever. He mastered more gates. He became one of the most powerful taijutsu users in the entire shinobi world. By every measurable metric he succeeded. He proved that hard work can take you to incredible heights. But here's what the show doesn't focus on, what the narrative glosses over. He was still the same person inside. The strength didn't heal the wound. The achievements didn't fill the hole. He was still Rock Lee, still fighting to prove something that could never be proven through fighting. And you can see it in his eyes during Shippuden. There's a tiredness there that wasn't there before. A heaviness that all the training in the world couldn't lift. This is the prophecy, that you can win every battle and still lose the war inside yourself. That you can achieve everything you set out to achieve and still feel empty. Rock Lee became exactly what he wanted to become. A powerful ninja, respected by his peers, recognized for his abilities. But the kid inside him who felt worthless? That kid was still there. Still waiting. Still hoping that someone would say, "You're enough just as you are." And nobody ever did. Because everyone was too busy being inspired by his grind to notice he was dying inside. Now here's where it connects to real life in a way that's gonna hit different. Think about every success story you've ever heard. The entrepreneur who built $1 billion company but still feels like a fraud. The actor who wins an Oscar but struggles with depression. The athlete who breaks every record but can't escape the voice in their head saying they're not enough. Society tells us that success solves internal problems, that achievement brings peace, that if you just work hard enough you'll finally feel worthy. But that's the biggest lie we've ever been sold. Because external validation can never heal internal wounds. You can have the whole world cheering for you and still feel alone. You can be the best at what you do and still hate who you are. Rock Lee proved that. And millions of people prove it every single day when they reach the top of the mountain and realize they brought all their demons with them. The prophecy isn't that hard work doesn't matter. It's that hard work without self-awareness is just organized self-destruction. It's that discipline without compassion is just punishment. It's that proving yourself to others can never replace accepting yourself as you are. And this is where Rock Lee's story becomes genuinely tragic, because he never learned this. He never had the revelation. He never got to the point where he stopped running and turned around to face the thing he'd been running from his entire life. Instead, he just kept going, kept training, kept fighting, kept performing the role of the hardest worker, until it became indistinguishable from who he actually was. Let's dig into the psychology of why this happens, because it's not just about Rock Lee, it's about the architecture of trauma and how it shapes identity. When you experience a core wound in childhood, especially around worth or belonging, your brain does something really specific. It creates a compensatory identity. This is a version of yourself that's designed to prevent the wound from ever happening again. So if you felt powerless as a kid, you might become a control freak as an adult. If you felt ignored, you might become an attention seeker. If you felt worthless like Rock Lee did, you become someone who constantly proves their value through achievement. The problem is, this compensatory identity isn't actually you, it's a defense mechanism. It's armor. And the longer you wear it, the more you forget there's a person underneath. Rock Lee wore his armor so long that he became the armor. His entire personality was constructed around compensation. The enthusiasm, the determination, the speeches about hard work, all of it was built on a foundation of, I'm not enough as I am. And here's the truly messed up part. The more successful he became, the more trapped he got. Because now he couldn't take the armor off even if he wanted to. Too many people depended on him being the inspirational figure. Too many people looked up to him for his work ethic. His identity had become public property. He couldn't have a breakdown, couldn't admit he was tired, couldn't say, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, without disappointing everyone who believed in him. So he stayed in character. He performed the role. And somewhere along the way he forgot he was performing. This is what happens in real life too, and it's one of the most insidious forms of psychological imprisonment. You build an identity around what people praise you for, and then you're stuck performing that identity forever. The funny friend who can't show sadness because that would ruin the vibe. The strong one who can't ask for help because that would make them seem weak. The successful one who can't admit they're struggling because that would shatter the image. You become a hostage to your own reputation. And the worst part? People don't even realize they're doing it to you. They're not being malicious, they just like the version of you that made them feel good, and they unconsciously pressure you to stay that version forever. Rock Lee was trapped in this exact dynamic. Guy Sensei needed him to be the proof that hard work wins. The Hidden Leaf needed him to be the inspiring underdog. The fans needed him to be the character who never gives up. So even when he was exhausted, even when his body was breaking down, even when some part of him wanted to stop and figure out who he was outside of the grind, he couldn't. Because too many people's belief systems depended on him staying in character. His existence had become about validating other people's choices, other people's beliefs, other people's need to believe that effort conquers all. And that's not a life, that's a sacrifice. That's slowly erasing yourself so others can feel hopeful. And here's the revelation that changes everything. Rock Lee was never fighting other people. He was fighting himself. Every opponent he faced was just a projection of his internal battle. Gaara represented the fear that natural talent would always crush effort. Niji represented the fear that destiny was real and he was destined to be mediocre. Kimimaro represented the fear that even his best wouldn't be enough. But none of those fights could ever be won because the real fight was internal. The real enemy was the voice in his head that said, you're only valuable when you're useful. And you can't punch that voice. You can't train hard enough to make it go away. You can only learn to stop believing it. But Rock Lee never learned that. He spent his whole life shadowboxing with his own unworthiness, thinking if he just landed enough hits, it would finally go down. But unworthiness isn't an opponent, it's a belief. And beliefs don't die from being fought. They only die from being questioned. So the prophecy fulfilled itself in the quietest, cruelest way possible. Rock Lee got everything he thought he wanted, and it changed nothing about how he felt inside. He became strong, respected, valued, but he still didn't feel worthy. Because worthiness was never about strength. It was about acceptance. And he never learned how to accept himself outside of his achievements. This is the trap that millions of people are living in right now. They're achieving, accomplishing, proving, and wondering why it still feels empty. They're doing everything right according to society's playbook, and still feeling like something's fundamentally wrong with them. That's because the playbook is broken. The game is rigged. You can't win your way into self-love. You can't earn your way into peace. You can only choose to stop playing a game that was designed to keep you running forever. And here's the most painful part. Rock Lee could have chosen differently at any point. He could have stopped and said, I'm enough as I am. He could have built an identity that wasn't dependent on constant performance. He could have learned to rest, to exist, to be human instead of a symbol. But he didn't. Not because he was weak, not because he wasn't smart enough, but because nobody showed him that was even an option. Everyone around him reinforced the grind. Everyone celebrated the sacrifice. Nobody said, hey, maybe you don't have to destroy yourself to matter. And without that permission, without that example, he just kept doing what he knew how to do. Work harder, push further, prove more. The prophecy was this: that a person could become exactly what they wanted to become and still lose themselves completely in the process. That you could win every external battle and still be at war with yourself. That you could inspire millions and still feel alone. Rock Lee's story isn't a success story, it's a warning. It's a mirror showing us what happens when we build our entire identity on compensation instead of connection, on proving instead of being, on running from pain instead of turning around and finally facing it. So here's what nobody wants to admit: Rock Lee's story didn't end. It just continued. And that's somehow more terrifying than any tragic ending could ever be. Because at least in tragedy there's resolution, there's catharsis, there's a moment where the pain finally means something. But Rock Lee? He just kept going. Kept training. Kept fighting. Kept being the same character he'd always been, playing the same role, running the same pattern. And the show moved on. The narrative shifted focus. New threats emerged, new characters took center stage, and Rock Lee became exactly what he feared most: background noise in someone else's story. Think about that for a second. After everything, after all the training, all the pain, all the sacrificing, all the proving, he became a supporting character in Naruto's journey. Not because he failed, but because that's just how stories work. The underdog who works hard is inspiring for a moment, but eventually the story needs to move forward, and it moves forward with the people who have the special bloodlines, the chosen one narratives, the destiny-driven arcs. Rock Lee did everything right according to his own philosophy, and it still wasn't enough to keep him relevant. That's not a plot hole, that's the point. That's the quiet, suffocating truth that the show accidentally revealed. Hard work matters, but it doesn't make you the protagonist of your own life. Sometimes you can give everything and still end up as a footnote. And here's where it gets really dark. Rock Lee probably knew this would happen. On some level, he had to know. He watched Naruto unlock Nine Tails chakra. He watched Sasuke awaken the Sharingan. He watched every naturally gifted person around him access power that no amount of training could replicate. And he kept training anyway. Not because he believed he could catch up, but because stopping would mean admitting that the system he built his entire identity on was fundamentally broken. So he chose delusion over despair. He chose to keep believing in the lie because the truth was too crushing to survive. This is what most people do when their coping mechanism stops working. They don't abandon it, they double down. They work harder, push further, sacrifice more, because admitting that the strategy isn't working would mean facing the original wound with no protection. Rock Lee couldn't afford to stop believing in hard work, because if hard work didn't matter, then what was all his suffering for? What did all those sleepless nights mean? What did opening the gates and nearly dying accomplish? If he admitted that effort alone wasn't enough, he'd have to face the possibility that he'd been destroying himself for nothing. And that kind of existential reckoning is too heavy for most people to carry. So they just keep going, keep performing, keep pretending the armor isn't suffocating them. Let's talk about what this looks like in the real world, because this is where Rock Lee stops being a character and starts being every person you've ever known who burned out and kept working anyway. The teacher who's been teaching for 20 years and stopped caring a decade ago but can't quit because teaching is their identity. The artist who fell out of love with their craft but keeps creating because being an artist is the only version of themselves they know how to be. The parent who resents their kids but keeps sacrificing because that's what good parents do, right? These aren't bad people, they're Rock Lees. They're people who built their entire sense of self on a coping mechanism, and now they're trapped inside it, going through the motions, performing the role, dying quietly while everyone around them thinks they're fine. And society doesn't help. Society looks at these people and calls them dedicated, calls them strong, calls them admirable. Nobody asks if they're happy. Nobody asks if they want to stop. Nobody gives them permission to step off the treadmill and admit that maybe this isn't working anymore. Instead, we give them awards for their sacrifice. We write articles about their work ethic. We hold them up as examples for the next generation to follow. And the cycle continues. More Rock Lees get created. More people learn that their worth is conditional on their performance. More humans get turned into machines, grinding themselves down in the name of dedication, discipline, achievement, all the words we use to make self-destruction sound noble. Here's the part that's gonna sit with you long after this video ends. Rock Lee's story isn't over because stories like his don't have endings. They just fade. The person keeps existing, keeps going through the motions, but the spark that made them who they were slowly dims until one day they wake up and realize they've been living on autopilot for years. They've been performing a version of themselves that doesn't even feel real anymore. And the scariest part? They don't know how to stop. They don't know who they'd be without the grind. They don't know what life looks like when it's not built around proving something. Rock Lee is probably still training right now in whatever timeline the Naruto universe exists in. Still doing push-ups. Still running laps. Still telling himself that hard work is enough. And maybe he's convinced himself he's happy. Maybe he's built enough psychological armor that he doesn't feel the emptiness anymore. Or maybe, in those quiet moments between training sessions when he's alone and there's nobody to perform for, he feels it. That hollow ache. That exhausting awareness that he's been running his whole life and he still hasn't gotten anywhere that matters. That all the strength in the world couldn't fill the hole inside him. But here's the thing, and this is where the story stops being about Rock Lee and becomes about you. You don't have to end up like him. You don't have to spend your whole life proving something that can never be proven through effort alone. You don't have to wait until you've sacrificed everything to realize the sacrifice wasn't necessary. You can stop right now. You can put down the armor. You can stop performing the version of yourself that you think people need you to be. You can admit that you're tired. That the grind isn't working. That you want something different even if you don't know what that looks like yet. And yeah, it's gonna be terrifying. Because if you're not the hard worker, the grinder, the one who never quits, who are you? That's the question Rock Lee never answered. That's the question most people spend their whole lives avoiding. But it's also the only question that actually matters. Because on the other side of that question is the possibility of existing without needing to justify your existence. Of being valuable without needing to constantly prove your value. Of finally, after years of running, stopping and realizing you were never being chased in the first place. The danger was always internal. The prison was always self-imposed. And the key to freedom was always in your hand, you were just too busy performing to notice. So here's what I'm not gonna do. I'm not gonna wrap this up with a nice bow. I'm not gonna tell you everything's gonna be okay if you just work on yourself or go to therapy or practice self-compassion. Because Rock Lee's story doesn't have that kind of resolution, and neither does real life. Some wounds don't heal, they just become something you learn to carry differently. Some patterns don't break, they just loosen their grip enough that you can breathe. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove themselves and never reach a point where they feel proven. And that's not inspirational, that's just true. What I will tell you is this. Awareness is the first step, but it's not the only step. Knowing you're trapped doesn't free you. Knowing you're running a pattern doesn't stop the pattern. You still have to make the choice every single day to do something different. To rest when your body says rest instead of pushing through. To admit you're struggling instead of pretending you're fine. To build an identity that isn't dependent on achievement, performance, or other people's validation. And that's hard. It's maybe harder than the grind itself because at least the grind is familiar. At least suffering is something you know how to do. But choosing peace? Choosing to just exist? That's foreign territory for people like Rock Lee. For people like you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people won't make that choice. Most people will keep grinding, keep performing, keep destroying themselves in the name of dedication. Because it's easier. Because it's what they know. Because stopping feels like admitting defeat. Rock Lee is a cautionary tale, but he's also a prediction. He's what happens to most people who build their identity on compensation. They just keep going until they can't anymore, and by then it's too late to become anyone else. But you're here. You made it this far. You watched this whole thing, which means some part of you is ready to stop running. Some part of you knows the grind isn't sustainable. Some part of you wants permission to be human instead of a machine. And I can't give you that permission, only you can give yourself that. But what I can give you is this, the awareness that you're not alone. That Rock Lee story is everyone's story who grew up feeling like they weren't enough and decided to spend their life proving otherwise. And that maybe, just maybe, there's another way. But here's what you need to understand. Rock Lee wasn't the only character trapped in this cycle. The entire Naruto universe is filled with people running from wounds they won't name, building identities on trauma they refuse to heal. Sasuke, Gaara, Kakashi, even Naruto himself. Every single one of them is caught in a different version of the same trap. And I've been breaking down the psychology behind each one, showing you exactly how their pain shaped them, how their coping mechanisms destroyed them, and what that reveals about your own patterns. If this hit you the way I think it did, if something in your chest cracked open watching Rock Lee's story unfold, then you need to see what I found in Sasuke's arc. Because while Rock Lee was destroying himself trying to prove he was enough, Sasuke was destroying himself trying to prove everyone else wasn't. Same wound, different weapon. And the way his story unfolds is going to show you something about revenge, identity, and the cost of making your pain into your purpose that you won't be able to unsee. That video is already up on the channel. It's waiting for you. And trust me, after everything you just absorbed about Rock Lee, Sasuke's breakdown is going to hit completely different. You'll see the pattern before it happens. You'll recognize the trap before he falls into it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start recognizing it in yourself before it's too late. Don't let this be the last time you think about this. Don't let this awareness fade back into the noise. Click that next video. Keep going. Because the story isn't over, and neither is yours.